Hey, this is Dr. Corey Glenn. I'm going to show an interesting case here. This was actually a full arch guided case, and unfortunately, despite everything going well in the planning stages and appearing to go well in the surgical phase, all of this patient's implants have failed. And so these have since been taken out. This was the immediate load restoration. And a few things that I think are worthwhile learning from this case. I'm still not entirely sure what the cause of the implant failure is. I'm hoping maybe I can tell something from a follow-up CT, but nonetheless, it is what it is at this point. And so what needs to be done now is we need to get her in a denture. And so what the doctor did is went ahead and scanned the patient. They did a scan with the intraoral scanner of the upper arch and the lower arch, and then a buccal bite. So that's these models. And the first thing that jumped out at me when I looked at this is how excessive the overbite is. If you notice here, that is, she had a decent overbite when we planned this based on her existing teeth, but it was not near this bad. And so trying to reverse engineer what happened, I have a few ideas, and I think it's a good learning opportunity. So let's take a look at the pictures of the original planning. So what you're seeing here on the top is from the planning phase. These are just snapshots taken from the Blue Sky plan file, and you can see that white is the hybrid that was designed. And you can see basically I pretty much matched her existing dentition because she had a decent dentition to start with. She was already in this lower locator overdenture. And so the green model was her original intraoral scan. This was a dentate patient that was having all those upper teeth extracted and implants placed and then immediate loaded. So again, you can see I just matched her overbite because her aesthetics were decent to start with. But now look at the lower pictures. These are the new intraoral scans. So somehow between here, what her normal bite was at the time of the planning and where it is now, she has retruded her mandible quite a bit. So the first thing I think of when I see that is that she was in an acquired bite in the preoperative phases. So if you think about it, a patient, actually the majority of patients don't bite down in-centric. And so when you look at her preoperative scan, again, she did have some overbite there, but it's gotten way worse. And so in trying to figure out what happened, what I think happened is that she was in an acquired bite, and the scans taken preoperatively were obtained in her maximum intercuspation bite as opposed to centric. My guess is that now with those maxillary teeth gone, she's lost proprioception. Her mandible went to now a fully seated position with the condyles all the way in the fossa, which was retruded from where her acquired bite was. And that's something you'll oftentimes see on denture cases, anything where you're substantially changing the occlusion. Your teeth have proprioception, and most people, when they bite down, they're not in-centric. They have an acquired bite and then a slide, usually down and forward into centric, or into maximum intercuspation. So what I think happened is that the original intraoral scans that were provided were taken in that maximum intercuspation, then all the maxillary teeth go. Those were what had the proprioception and kind of told her that when she would hit to slide into this final position. Well, with those teeth gone and now just an implant retained prosthesis, her mandible retruded back, and now she's in a much more seated position. So even though the teeth are almost a mirror image of where she was preoperatively, she has the feeling that this is way too bucky, and that it doesn't look good. And again, I mean, you can see here, comparatively speaking, that the teeth positions are virtually the same. But by virtue of her mandible moving, it doesn't look good. I'm sure that's just going to be more difficult for her to speak phonetically. So since this maxillary prosthesis has actually already been taken out, we've got to make her a denture, okay? And so I want this denture that she's going to wear while she's healing to reflect this new occlusal position, and now I'm going to assume this is in-centric. But one takeaway lesson from this before I move on to designing that denture is that I think it's always a good idea on any kind of a full arch case, whether it's dentures, full arch immediate load implants, anything like that, crown and bridge rehab, try to take your intraoral scans in-centric. And the easiest way to do that, in my opinion, is using a leaf gauge. You can use the leaf gauge as a screening tool. You can use it to capture a centric bite pretty easily. But put the leaves in there and disclude all of the teeth, where now there's just an anterior midpoint stop, because what that's going to do is let the elevator muscles pull the joint all the way into its deepest position and then acquire your scan right there. And I would bet if we did that, we probably would have known, on the front end that she would have had a much greater overbite here. But I don't think that's what contributed to the failure of the case, but it's just a good thing to know. So usually my suggestion for any kind of a full arch case for guided surgery is acquire your intraoral scans and your cone beam in centric at the VDO that you want to restore them at. Okay, so here again, you can use the leaf gauge, open them up to the approximate VDO that you want to restore in, and then capture that with all of the teeth discluded, and that's where your intraoral scans are. So you would just scan the upper, you would scan the lower, but then you would have that centric bite that you have obtained using the leaf gauge, and you just stick that bite back in and let them hold in that position while you scan the buccal bite, and that will orient the upper to the lower. So again, here we are. This is where she's at now, and we've got to make a denture. And as I make this denture, I'm probably going to do two things. I think I'm going to open the bite a little bit to bring this mandible down a bit so that I've got some more interocclusal space, and then also I need to bring these teeth back. Now, I don't think that we can get a perfect class 1 occlusion because she's pretty significantly class 2, but I definitely think that we can improve on this. But I don't like on an implant supported prosthesis full arch to have this much overbite and overjet. If you think about it, she's going to have all of her occlusal forces as she functions going from inside out, and she's kind of trapped in there, and that's really not the ideal scenario. And so I'll probably open her a little bit, but before we even get to that, I've got to modify these models and get them ready to design the dentures. So right now I'm just going to hide the lower. The lower I don't really need to do a lot with because that's just going to be used to set teeth against. But if I want to make a denture on this, my first step is I've got to get a maxillary tissue model. Now, I've already discussed with the doctor, we fully expect to have to do some occlusal adjustment on this, and we know that the internal fit is not going to be perfect because we've got these models that were acquired, with the prosthesis still on. So what I'm doing now is I'm in Mesh Mixer, I'm using the select tool, and I'm just going to go around and select all around this prosthesis, and we're just going to cut it out of the model. And again, doctor knows that he'll have to do some relining of this denture. It's probably going to be a sloppy fit, and that's just part of it. If you wanted to minimize this more and get better vestibular extension on your model, probably the best bet is just to take an alginate and pour it up, because then you'll get the full tissue borders. One of the limitations of doing dentures, period, with an intraoral scan is that, by definition, if you're going to capture this flange area or the depth of the vestibule, you're going to have to take that tissue and really stretch it out. Well, in doing so, you're overextending your borders. Okay, and then secondly, it's just really difficult. You see all these areas of overlap, like right here, because that tissue is very mobile. So as you stretch it different directions, you end up getting these overlaps. So there's going to certainly be a decent amount of fudging going on here, which is why I expect to have to reline this. So first thing I've done is I've gone ahead and selected all around this restoration. I'm going to just hit B to smooth that, and then I'm deleting that. So now what I have is this. I've just clicked on it. Now I'll hit E, which is expand to connected, and I'm going to hit Y. Okay, that has now turned that into a separate STL. Y is separate, and now I've got this model. Okay, and then I'm going to try to clean up some of this noise data. So a lot of this floating stuff, like right there, I don't need. So I could go selecting that stuff one by one, but the easier way is just to click one time on this main model, hit E, which is expand to connected, and that's going to not select all these floating bits. So if I hit I, that's invert your selection, and then I can delete those floating bits. Okay, now we'll end up filling all this in, and what I'll probably do is I will kind of bubble that out where it's probably bigger in contour than her actual tissue is, but that's okay, because again, I want it to be a bit sloppy so that he's not having to adjust this thing a ton prior to doing a reline. I'd rather the reline pick up that intimate fit of the tissue and him not be grinding on acrylic. So we've got a lot of ways that we could go about closing this. First thing I'm going to do is just smooth this border. So I've selected the border there by just double clicking right on one of the edge triangles of this boundary. I'm going to hit B. That is smooth boundary. And now I could maybe break this into some sections. Okay, so for example, if I was to select right here and right here, I can hold Control B, and that's bridge. Okay, and then maybe let's do another one here at the midline. So I'll select right here to right here, Control B. All right, I'm just breaking this into some smaller sections. Let's do from there to there, Control B. There we go. Okay, and as I mentioned, I want this to end up being kind of larger than what is being reflected here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just Analysis, Inspector, and I'm just going to fill in these holes. So I don't want to click this border because it's going to try to just close this in, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to selectively just click on this. Right now it's set to flat fill. That's okay. I'm really just looking to fill this in. So I'll click each of these blue dots and let that just flat fill in. All right, so that has all been filled in. Now, the reason I do that is because by virtue of doing that, you know, it creates these face groups. So now I could select just this yellow and this blue one and hit G, that's expand to groups. And now I could maybe use a different function to inflate this. So instead of just, you know, using an inflate tool and raising this up, I could hit F. F is erase and fill, that's the hotkey for it. And the reason I like that is because it has this bulge slider. Okay, so you can see here as I've done that, I've somewhat overinflated the jaw, and that may be not enough, but I had it a little too much earlier. So let's go somewhere between, right there. Okay, so that's kind of overinflated to what her jaw really is. That's where I'm making sure that he's not going to have to grind a lot of acrylic out. I'm going to repeat with these two, selected them, G, and let's hit F. All right, and let's drag that bulge slider and inflate that a bit. Okay, right there. I'll accept it. And then the last one, I'm going to do these three, G, and now I'll hit F. F is erase and fill. I'm using hotkeys on this video for all this stuff, but do realize that all of these functions are going to be up here under this edit menu. So again, let me clear this. If I just go to select and double click this, then I could have gone to here, and you see erase and fill is this first function, but the hotkeys are listed out to the side. So F is what I was hitting for erase and fill because I like that bulge feature. All right, so now we've got the area where the implants have come out and all that closed in. We've got this overlap area here where it's not really meshing together great. And so what I'm going to do to repair this border is I'm going to select that area, and then I'll come over here and select maybe this area. And now I'm going to hit Control B. So over here, this is bridge, right? So bridge, and you see Control B is the hotkey. All right. And by doing that, now that has a closed border on it that I can click here and do the exact same thing. All right, I've smoothed the boundary, F, and it's overfilled it. That's fine. Remember, I told him he's going to have to do some relining on this. So now I could just take this smooth tool and just smooth out that boundary a little bit. Okay. I'll probably end up building in an offset on this denture too, so that I know it's got a little bit of slop in the internal fit. All right, so knowing that I'm doing that, and secondly that these borders are really extended, right? That's probably out beyond where her actual tissue boundary is going to be. Now that is one thing, I don't really know where her tissue boundaries are, so chances are the flanges will be long, and that's just something that's going to have to be adjusted in the mouth by, let's see. So I just tried to bridge that and it failed. And if I'm trying to analyze why, it's probably just because of how jagged this is. So let me just touch that real quick with a couple of smooths and see if now I could select a portion there and here, Control B, bridge, and then fill that in. All right, so I'm just repairing this model right now. It's all that I'm really doing. Okay, now this is a little bit more challenging area. This is going to have a short boundary. Okay, so what I probably want to do is just make sure that I at least get this deep enough that he'll be able to pick up something to you know, contain his reline material. So let me just select that bit and here, Control B. All right, and then once again, let's get a new selection, select that edge boundary, F, and let's bulge that out a little bit since I'm guessing really at where her tissue is. All right, here we've got overlapping boundaries of the tissue, so this portion is in deeper, and I'd rather pick, or I'm sorry, it's shallower, so I'd rather delete that and maintain this portion. Control B, and then fill it in. And every time I do that erase and fill, I'll bulge it out a little bit. Okay, that created a couple little floating bits. So since I've already got a selection on this main portion, I'll hit E, expand to connected, I for invert, and delete, and you see those floating bits disappear. All right, just going around and continuing this process. So right there and there, let's bridge that. And then let's fill in this hole. And if I need to, I will hit it with the smooth tool. So you can see there's, whenever you're making a denture off of intraoral scan data, there is undoubtedly a lot more guesswork involved, okay? I don't think that's gonna be a huge deal here because, you know, it's gonna have to be relined. This is not a permanent denture. This is buying her some time while new implants are placed, okay? We're definitely not going to have completely all the way back to the hamular notches on this, so I'm going to just basically have to make up that data, or I would just leave the denture short and the doctor would have to extend his tray a little bit to go back there and pick up that hamular notch, maybe with some border molding compound, some tack beads, something like that, that would have enough body to hold in that reline material and extend that back. All right, so just getting a good smooth boundary on all of this. And I'm going to bridge this area to here. And all right, so that failed, and probably because we're so rough on this boundary. So I'm going to hit O, which is optimize, and B, smooth boundary, and now let's hit F, and now it works. So this is the frustrating thing about Mesh Mixer, is just learning some of these little nuances about how to make it cooperate with you when you're having trouble. All right, that looks decent. And then while we're at it, let me show you just one other trick I'll sometimes do. I'm going to go up here to Mesh Mix. So these are all just primitive shapes that you can grab. I'm going to get a cylinder and just drag it over here. Okay, and I'm going to pull it over here on top of this maxillary model. And I'm going to go ahead at this point and stretch this and make it quite a bit bigger, something like that. If you'd like to, you can shorten it as well. Okay, and what I want to do is orient this to maybe approximately her occlusal plane. Okay, I'm looking at her mandible right there and something like that. I'm looking here, and I want to pretty much get this symmetric with her midline and everything. So that would work here. And then I'm going to pull this down. So this will make sense in a moment, but what I'm doing here is I'm creating think of this like beating and boxing your model, okay? So I know I'm impinging here. Don't worry about that right now. I'm just going to accept this, okay? I also like to periodically just save the case. So I'm saving it as a mesh mixer plan, a .mix file, because that just happens instantaneously. I don't have to worry about waiting on it and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to end up merging this model out to this, but one of the issues, if I hit W here, I'll turn on the wireframe of the triangles. So when you pull in these primitive shapes, the reason they're so fast and easy to manipulate is because they have this huge triangle mesh size, and that makes it easy and quick to make changes, but it's not going to play nice with this one, which has a much finer mesh. You see how much finer that is? So there's a couple of ways that I could address that, because one of the things I just know from experience is that these models are probably not going to play nice together on joining functions, on Boolean functions, because the mesh densities are too different. So I've got two options here. I could either hit Control A to select that whole object, and now I could hit R. R is remesh, and then in the remesh I could increase the mesh density, okay? Now that's one option, and I could repeat that a couple of times until it looks like there's similar mesh densities. However, I could also just go about this a different way, which is to go to Edit, Make Solid. So I'm making this cylinder shape solid, and by virtue of doing that, you see that it also increases the mesh density. And I could further increase that density by changing this, but I think that's good enough. Okay, turning the wireframe off now, I'm going to go around and basically just select a perimeter here. Doesn't have to be real clean. Let's delete that. And then now that this is free floating, I'll select it, hit E for expand to connected, because it's no longer connected to this one, and I'll delete that too. All right. So I'm hiding that mandible again. And now you hopefully can kind of get an idea of what I'm doing. I'm going to end up merging this boundary. I'll select all of this boundary and then merge it out to this. And I just want to look this over and see if there's any other modifications I would do to the boundaries before doing that. And one thing I would probably do, I know for sure I'm not going to end up going out that far with her tissue boundary. So I'm just going to delete that part. And that part I'd kind of like to fill in. So I'm going to select a portion here and a portion here, Control B, and then I will delete that selection, and now I'm filling that in. All right. So basically all of my holes on this, I think, have been filled, but I want to double check it. I'm going to inspect it. And actually I do see now, this is pointing to the open boundary underneath. Now I knew that was not closed, but I do have some other errors in the mesh. So I'll just single click those to fix them. All right, all fixed. And now I've got two independent STLs, this tissue model and this. So in my objects browser, I'm going to control select both of them. And sometimes it doesn't automatically pop up. Usually it's going to pop up and it'll say Boolean union, Boolean difference, Boolean intersection, combine. Sometimes you'll get this, and I don't really know the reason why sometimes it defaults to this, but if when this pops up, you'll just go to edit, it will bring that up. So now I'm going to combine these, okay? I'm not really doing a Boolean there because those models weren't even touching one another. So now what I'm going to do is select the boundaries. So it can help sometimes if you're trying to just select an edge triangle, because that's what you have to do. If you're trying to select the whole boundary, is you're just selecting an edge triangle and double clicking it. And I'll do the same over on here. So that wireframe enables me to see that. And it can just be toggled on and off with that W. So I've selected both boundaries, but I'm also going to hit O for optimize boundary. That's here. And then it's under modify, optimize boundary, and then you can see here B is smooth boundary. So I'm gonna hit B because that's gonna allow these to join a little bit better. So now I'm gonna hit J for join right here. So J, and what it's gonna do is it's gonna merge these boundaries that I've selected by just making the shortest distance out to that and merging them together. So essentially I'll get a big, think of pouring a giant base on a model. That's what I've just done here, but digitally. All right, and now you see how that has done that. Now, actually, I don't like how it's done this because it's kind of gone goofy here. Like, I don't know what that's about. So it doesn't like something about this, so I'm going to cancel that and show you how I could do this a different way if that doesn't work initially. I could just now take the select tool, and just like I did previously on the holes where we removed the hybrid restoration, I can just select a portion of mesh, and this may be part of the reason why. See, that's kind of roughened right there. I'm going to look for any other rough areas on this boundary like that. So I'm going to break this into smaller sections. So I could connect hamular notch, that area, out to say here and get a pretty big bite. Control B, and now I've created a isolated hole here. I'm going to do the same on this other side. Control B. And all the time I'm just going up here real quick and saving this, because even though I've cut it out of this video, I did have one crash running a little low on memory on my computer, so it's prone to errors when you're running close to your limits of your memory. And now I'm doing this, and I'm Control B. There we go. And now I could just do this as a normal inspector and then fill in these holes with the flat fill. So I'm going to auto repair all of those. All right, now you see that that has filled that in. And if I wanted to smooth these up, you know, anytime you do those fill functions, it turns those fill areas into a face group. So if I just selected a little bit of each of those face groups and hit G, I could smooth all of this now. So under Deform Smooth or Control F. And then I could further smooth that out by increasing the smoothing scale. And there you see that that has smoothed out quite a bit more. So I'm just going to accept this. And in essence, I have now put a big base on this. Now, that may seem like that was a lot of trouble, and for what reason? Well, the reason I'm doing it is because, one, I want a good land area so that when I'm building a denture in blue sky, it doesn't just fall off the edge. And you know, you might have experienced sometimes building a denture where you get these spikes off. That's just where it's falling off the edge of your model. So if I have a big land area, I don't have to really worry about that. But secondly, I need to fudge some of these boundaries and make them a little bit deeper. You know, here, I've got back to almost to the hamular notch here, but I really don't back here. So I'm just going to fudge it. You know, I'm going to go to Inflate, and I'm going to just make believe, you know, establishing what I think her ridge probably looks like. So I'm using the Inflate tool. Okay, if I'm going to err, I'd rather err towards making this a little excessive and, you know, have him have to grind some acrylic back after the reline. But if it's, you know, if I make this too shy initially, that's going to be a problem because he may have to do a bunch of adjusting on the acrylic to even get this thing in her mouth. And now he doesn't have anything to contain the reline. So I'm just fudging here. I'm inflating this. If I wanted to make a border deeper somewhere, okay, let's think about that. So here, that border just wasn't captured. And so if I wanted to make a deeper boundary using that same inflate tool, if I hold the control button, that makes it a deflate tool. So you see how I'm kind of digging in a boundary here? All right, and then I'll smooth this. So all of this area where I have kind of made up my own contours, I'm smoothing it. I'm going to do that over here as well. So now, whereas I could have earlier, I could have just built a denture and just built the extension to what I had here, but then I know it's got inadequate borders, this wouldn't have been near long enough. So even though I know this is not necessarily accurate, at least it'll extend acrylic back here to contain that reline material, and then he can grind it back to whatever thinness he wants. Okay, so now that I have this, I'm going to I don't need all of this. I'm going to just build myself a model of a good land area. So I'm deleting that. I'll select this one, E, expand to connected, and then I to invert, and I'll just get rid of all of that. So certainly a lot of guesswork here, but that's now my, think of a beaded and boxed impression, kind of just trying to make something out of this intraoral scanning. Okay, so I've opened Blue Sky Plan, and we're going to be building dentures here. So I'll select dentures from the home page, and we're going to import all the models. So very important when you do this that you import all of your models at the same time. So I want to import her original master model, which that's the one that had the hybrid. I want to be able to see where those teeth were for reference to bring them back in this new setup. So I'm going to pull that one in. I'm going to pull in her lower. And then remember, we just created this new master model that has the land area and all that. So I'm going to import all three of those at the same time. Very important you bring them all in at the same time, because you're going to see this first step here. We're going to be orienting the models to what Blue Sky sees as up, down, side to side. So if you just did that with one model, then when you bring in the second model, it's not going to have the same position change applied, and now you're going to be in trouble. So I can select any of these models and let's orient them. I'll just choose this maxilla and say dentate, and let's continue to alignment. So Blue Sky will prompt you. You just basically are putting, each annular notch and then the incisive. I'll continue and then show all of the models. And I'll usually just jump through that quickly and get to this point. But when I'm at this stage, I do want to orient this to where it's the correct occlusal plane. So like that. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but I do like to try and align this to the grid so that I can see where the midline and everything is. So as I'm doing this, I can look from above here and see that her midline is going right through here. Now this is just based off of her maxillary anatomy, but that will probably give me a better idea of where to put the midline, because again, she has settled in, and you can see that that midline is off from where it probably should be. So let me just modify this a little bit. I think that might be a little too much, so I'm going to spin this around slightly. So it looks like this vertical component now I've got going right through the middle of her palatal raphe, and that's going to help me because as I'm looking at this, I know that when I drop the set of teeth on here, and you can see it's a little deeper on this side than that, so I'll rotate it slightly. That's going to really ease my tooth setup because I've just got to drop the teeth onto this horizontal plane and put the midline coming through this vertical component. So I'm going to accept this by hitting finish. And now you can see my models are oriented to this skull down here. Okay, now if we hadn't done that, bringing all of the models in at the same time, that wouldn't have happened. So just a couple things to notice. You can see the blue is the original master model, and you can see all of this that I've added beyond that in the green. That's my new kind of make-believe master model. Again, knowing that he's going to have to do some reline of this. All right, so we've got models in place. We're going to reference the blue one during the tooth setting, but we're going to actually set to the green one. Now the other thing I notice, and I'm going to hide that blue model for a moment. So when I do that, one thing I notice is she's got not a lot of interocclusal space. So this is where I was saying earlier, I think that I'll have to open the bite some. So let me show you how you do that. We're in model editing module, okay? And if I go to, let's see, panels and buccal bite registration, you've got the ability here to put on an articulator. So let's do that. Let's place the jaw articulator. And let's designate which model is which. So I'm going to say master model, and then my lower, because Blue Sky Plan doesn't know what's lower, what's upper. So designate them. So we're going green and blue, and let's show both of them. And in doing that, it has now dropped in this virtual articulator, okay? And I'm going to just spin this thing around and basically put this on to my models where we can orient them properly. So let's hide that blue model right now. Again, back to buccal bite registration. Let's show the articulator. And as I hover on that, I want to position this where that is basically on the lower incisors. And essentially this is based on a Bonwell triangle, okay? So that's how every semi-adjustable articulator functions, is that it's essentially orienting an average Bonwell triangle to your models. All right, so I'll put that kind of on the lower incisors. And then I also want to make sure that it's somewhat symmetric. So as I look at it here, oriented to our occlusal plane, it's twisted a little bit. So I'm going to flatten that out just slightly. And then I also need to bring it around this direction a little bit. So if I can't see, I could always make this model somewhat transparent, just enough to see through there. Show the articulator again. And anytime I hover on that point, it's going to give me the widget where I can rotate this. So I'm just looking here, again, I'm thinking right here is the midline of this model. If I made that line, I would want it to come right through the middle of this back component here. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So in essence, this is going to be your pivots on the articulator. Think of the joints. This is where the joints would be, okay? And now I can open it. So I'm going to open this a little bit to give myself a bit more interocclusal space, and we're going to go with that, okay? So at this point, we're ready to proceed to denture design. So I'm going to change to denture module. And now this mandible is in that new slightly opened position, okay? So let's now do a tooth setup. I'm going to go up here and select a set of teeth. We'll use the Brennis oval teeth, female patient. I think that one would look good, and we'll select all the maxillary teeth and click OK, and then I'll hold Shift and drop this into position. All right, here's where aligning that earlier is going to be helpful, because now I can just position this so that the midline of her model is passing through the midline of the teeth. I obviously need to rotate this downward a bit. Okay, now still a decent underbite present with this, but you know, it is what it is. That's just where her mandible settled back into, so that's what we've got to work with. So I'm trying to judge the scaling of the teeth to see if I need to shrink all of these. So I'm thinking of a class 1 relationship. And, you know, she does have a step in the occlusion back here. So I'll probably end up having to twist this down a little bit. Control-Z that, didn't mean to do that. All right, so if you think about just maxillary anatomy, you're generally not going to have teeth back behind the ridge, and so I've basically gone even with the ridge. If I wanted to compare that to her setup that she's in currently, you can see that's where she is at the moment, and I'm going to split the difference between here and where she originally was. So I'll pull this outward just a little bit, maybe right there. So I've brought her back a good 3 to 4 millimeters, and I can scale down the teeth some. So under the denture panel, I can take this scale slider and maybe bring that down a bit. Alright, getting my midline set. And we're probably going to just leave that bit of a gap in the anterior region. Alright, let's hide this model. And I can look from the bottom and see where I'm impinging into this. So all of that probably needs to be rotated up a bit. And then still impinging, so I'll just bring the entire occlusion up just a little bit. So usually when I do this, I'm not being perfect with this. I'm gonna get it where I'm just not impinging a ton. Okay, so now I'm gonna unclick, move entire tooth chain. And now I could do some individual tooth movements. So as I look here, I think that I need to bring her posteriors on this side in a little bit. I need to bring the posteriors on this side out a little bit because my midline is set, right? So I'm going to turn on the tooth chain, show and hide tooth chain. And let's maybe lock this canine. And now holding shift and grabbing the tooth just distal to this, I'm going to swing those teeth outward slightly. Okay? And I'm looking, I would want the lingual cusps occluding in the central groove here. That's decent. Over here, I'm going to lock it at the canine and bring this in a little bit so that they're occluding on the central groove. All right, the remainder of it I'm going to do by individual tooth movements. So again, let's forget about this gap here because we'll just make the pink of the denture be what she occludes on in this anterior region. But let's look at individual teeth and see what we need to do. So if I hit manipulate model, now I'll be able to just individually tweak teeth. So pulling that down slightly. I've got just a slight contact here. You can always make this either invisible, or actually what I would have rather done is just make it transparent. So let's toggle transparency. Now hovering this tooth, I'm going to come up until I'm right there. Again, I'm thinking this cusp, lingual cusp in the central grooves. So there. I'm going to pull this tooth over slightly and bring it up until I create an occlusal stop. And again, this has a big step in the occlusion, which I'm not really going to try to match. I think it's going to be kind of goofy if she has, you know, two teeth back here that are locked in. That's not going to make for great denture stability. So this will get pulled down, but I'm not going to try to just, you know, make it dead on perfect. So I've twisted that tooth a little bit. This one, I'll do the same and bring it down slightly. And it's going to need to come over a bit. So lingual cusps and central grooves, that looks good. Now one thing I could do with these anterior teeth is maybe stretch them lingually. So I could maybe pull that. It's going to make for a thicker incisal edge, and you know, hopefully she'll come closer to occluding on those teeth. So I'm just manually stretching these lingually. And I do try to keep it somewhat symmetric. There we go. And then here, I could rotate this tooth down a little bit to improve that contact. Okay, this tooth, let's pull it in slightly. And right there, it's an occlusion now. Let's look at this one. I think that tooth could be rotated down. Okay, that looks good. Let's maybe spin it a bit this way. So I've made that tooth a bit skinnier just because, you know, when you're matching to an existing dentition, it's always a much more difficult setup than if you're just doing a complete denture setup. So if I just grab the tooth and not on the widget, I can just manually move the whole tooth. And let's pull that in here again, trying to put lingual cusp in roughly the central groove. Okay, that's pretty close. All right. All right. Now in the denture module, usually you're just building a denture, right? And so your individual tooth functions, you can stretch teeth, you can manually move them, but the denture module is not the ideal place where if you wanted to maybe shorten an individual cusp. Usually you don't have to do that on complete dentures, right? Because the teeth are preset. But here, I've got to match this to an existing dentition. I'd kind of like to maybe shorten some of these individual cusps. That is better done in the crown and bridge module. So I'm briefly going to switch over to the crown and bridge module, and I'm going to try to tweak this occlusion a little bit. So selecting this tooth, I can hit local geometry, and right there where it's hitting, I've just reduced that a little bit. Okay. This cusp, same thing. I'm going to pull that all down until it's just out of occlusion. There we go. If I wanted to, I could stretch, you know, the lingual surface out individually instead of bringing the whole thing, but I'm not going to really worry about that too much here. I want to pull that cusp down slightly. This one. So think of this as if you were just taking a burr and grinding on individual teeth. Okay, where it's impinging in the occlusion, you can just adjust it a little bit. So now I've kind of tweaked my setup, and I think we're pretty close to being ready to set this. I do think this tooth is out of occlusion, so I'm going to pull it down into alignment with the others, and as I've done that, you can see I am impinging into that more. So we'll come back and we'll do a little bit more tweaking on that. So this tooth, let's go back to local geometry, and let me just bring this lingual cusp down some. All right. One more look over. Again, anytime you're setting to an existing dentition, you're not going to have a perfect occlusal plane unless they had a perfect lower set against, which she doesn't. You know, again, you can see the step here. But that's good enough. So I've done some individual tooth tweaking in the crown and bridge. Now I'm going back to denture, and I'm going to actually design the denture. So now to design the denture, I'll go to the denture panel and say we're building a denture on this green model. It's a maxillary denture, and I'll hit create denture. Okay, step one, it's going to lead you through the steps. This is indicating your path of draw. And so I want to get rid of as many undercuts as possible. So I'll come in with a little bit more forward direction. You can always just look at your model too, and say if I oriented like that, say set my insertion direction from this view. And I'm going to allow it to engage undercuts. So I'll just max this out. All right, and now I'll click next. And you see what that did is created a path of draw model now. And again, even though it doesn't really block any undercuts out, you do see it kind of bases it. Now for my offset. Usually for a denture I would have no offset because I want to build it exactly to their dentition. But remember here, this is off an intraoral scan, it's not the greatest data, and I fully expect to reline it. I know I've also made up some of the data on the borders, so I'm going to build in maybe a 0.25 to 0.3 offset, and that's going to give him that little bit of slop space where if maybe I, artificially made that denture where it would impinge into a real tissue, hopefully this might account for it. So I'm going to do an offset there. Again, most dentures I would not. So let's click next. And now I've got to define the contour. All right, so at this point I don't need that grid on, nor do I need this lower model visible. Now I'm going to draw my boundary. So remember, it's going to be relined. So I'm just going to draw a boundary. In an ideal world, I would have a perfect border molded model and I could see the exact vestibular extension and just set my extension to there. Here, I just don't have that because it's very difficult to attain that with intraoral scan data. So what I'm going to do instead is just try to imagine in my mind where her vestibule would actually be. Okay, so like right here, that was made up data, right? We didn't capture her hamular notch on this one, but I'm just giving it my best guess. And this will come with the disclaimer to the doctor that he will definitely have to stick this in and adjust his borders before doing his relines and all that. So let's say that's our denture border. Maybe that one can bring in just slightly, and right there. It's easy to shorten a denture. It's hard if you made the borders too short. It's hard to lengthen them with border molding compound or whatever. So I'd rather overdo it just a slight bit. Click next. Make the denture base. Okay, so here's my initial gingival proposal. You almost always have to do some tweaking of this, so I'm going to just take my smooth tool and I'll usually just go to the maximum strength and smooth out any rough contours on the palatal area. And now I'm going to do the same on my buccal. And once you've kind of smoothed everything, now you can begin looking at, is there anywhere where the gingiva is covering too much? It most definitely is right there, so I'm going to smooth that back a little bit. Smooth back a little bit there, a little bit here. And then if there's anywhere I need to pull the gingiva out, I'll usually use the local deform tool. And I do try to get symmetry, so you can see here that lateral is got a little too little gingiva. This one's got too much gingiva, so I'm going to pull it back. I'm just trying to ballpark them and get the same gingival margins. So that's in the neighborhood. Let's give it one more smooth over. And then if you want to, you can do some gingival rolls, root prominences, things like that. I find for most people it's sufficient to just do kind of a gingival roll on the anterior teeth. So usually I'll go about halfway on the strength. Let's say right there. And a spot size of about here. And I'm just going to do this. All right, looks a little rough, and that's okay because I'm going to end up smoothing that. Let's go with a light smooth, low strength. You can see I'm just knocking the edge off that. And I can always come back and go over it again if I feel like I didn't maybe do enough the first time. So you won't tend to get as much of a rough gingival roll on that if you'll use a little bit bigger spot size. There we go. We got that, and there. And again, I'm going to hit it with smooth one more time. Big brush size, low strength. Just swipe across it very quickly. And I'm going to call that good. So this is going to be the denture that I'm going to fabricate. So now I'm going to click next. And I want to connect all of these teeth into a single STL file. I like to change this minimum denture base thickness. Okay, so if you look here, for example, that's the only tooth that's impinging into this, but it is impinging nonetheless. So let me hide this denture base very quickly. So when you're thinking about these parameters here, minimum denture thickness, I like to move that up to about 0.6. That means it's going to trim any tooth that is impinging to maintain at least 0.6 of thickness of that denture base everywhere. So this tooth that's impinging is going to get trimmed back a decent amount. You'll see it after I process this. And then the tooth offset, that's how much spacer, like slop spacer, do you want between teeth and gingiva. And I'm going to bump this up to maybe 0.3. Just I want those teeth to be easy to insert. And now I'm going to click next and process this denture. All right, so I'll time lapse this because this will take about 2 minutes to process. And here we have the final denture. Okay, so this is now going to get exported. You can see here this is the tooth chain, and it has built connectors between all of these teeth so that it's going to handle like a single horseshoe of teeth. And if I hide that and turn the base on, you can see the base here. And this is where I was talking about the minimum denture thickness. You know, it subtracted enough of that tooth away so that even right here where I had that tooth impingement, it's ensured that this, in the very depth of it, is at least 0.6 thick. And then we've got that 0.25 or 0.3 of offset that I built in between teeth. That is this space. Okay, that's the tooth offset. So now I'm just going to export this. So let's first of all export just the base, export data. I'm going to turn everything off except for what I've got labeled denture-fin. That's the final denture base with sockets. It will take half an export, and I'm going to call this BS denture with sockets, denture base with sockets. And now I'm going to do the same for the teeth. Turn all those models off. All I want is that connected teeth file. And I'm going to call this BS tooth chain. And then it's never a bad idea to also export your models at this stage, because remember, you've applied a shape change to these. So for example, this, if I was to save this and bring it back into that original mesh mixer file, you'll see these models are not oriented the same way because we had to realign them for Blue Sky Plan. So I'm going to just overwrite now my denture, that master model. So master model, overwrite that, yes. I'm going to do now the lower. Well, we'll do this too. File, export data. And that's going to be the upper with hybrid. I'm saving that. Overwrite, yes. And then finally the lower model. So export data, and then we're essentially done. All right, so network. Lower. So the last step would just be to print this, which I'm not going to really show in this video. I've shown that in several before, but we'll just at least show one of them. So I'll end up printing the teeth in crown and bridge material, probably on my 55 to get the highest resolution. Generally, I find if I'll print the teeth at like 50 microns on my 55, there is absolutely no discernible layer lines, and you can end up getting a really nice polish to them without having to do lots of pumice work or anything like that. So I'll do this in OnX, all right, and we'll apply that, and now I'm going to bring in that tooth model. So tooth chain, here it is. And I'll probably end up making them too, just because why the heck not? It's going to be minimal material usage, and it's no longer to do it. So I'm going to do it this way. Now, one thing I've changed, I used to always orient the occlusal surface down. I actually don't do that anymore, because one of the things you'll find is when you orient a tooth chain like this, and then let's apply the supports, and I want you to look at something on this. So if I built the supports in here, let's use a medium density and medium strength, and let's generate supports. Okay, so this has got only a single point of contact on this big flat incisal edge, right? So imagine it's printing now. So it's printing along, it's got this skinny support, and then when it gets to the end of this support, all of a sudden in a single layer, it's got to jump out and capture this whole flat incisal edge. And that's a big overhang for that to capture. And I've done this so many times where I'll end up getting these rounded off corners because it just has a tough time. So if I was going to orient it like this, I would manually add additional supports. I would come in and maybe put one there and there and there and there. But really what I find is more useful is just to not worry about that. I've started instead going like this with my orientation, because now we've got these big rounded edges on the bottom that are going to be easy to pick up with the printer and the supports. And if I over reduce the supports a little bit, that just creates a tiny void that is going to get filled in with that pink material as I pick the teeth up. And so I would rather have that. I can adjust all those support bumps off, and this should print really nicely, and it has fewer supports to start with. Even if I go increase density on the supports, it's going to be less overall, and then I'll just have to trim that just a little bit to make sure there's no support bump that's going to interfere with this thing seating into the denture base. So again, I'm going to do 2 sets for him. We'll go with that, and so now I'm ready to print. I'll just repeat the process and print 2 of the upper base and print that in a pink material, and then pick up the teeth in the white teeth in the pink base as I've shown in previous videos. So you know, kind of a convoluted case because it's just a difficult one that we're trying to salvage something from, but hopefully you learned something there that makes this worthwhile. Maybe if nothing else, some mesh mixer tips. So I hope you found that helpful.